So now we're going to talk about the nervous system. And before we do that, I want to explain why I'm even talking about it, why I think it's universally designed, and really explain the background. So when I first started learning about self-regulation and anxiety and other connected subjects, the experts that I was learning from were talking almost exclusively about the limbic system. And so I was starting my self-regulation practice and I got to a certain point. And as a sidebar, if you want to know more about my personal self-regulation practice, I have a video where I talk about it that you could check out at the end of this playlist. And if you need to draw inspiration, if you want to get examples of what someone else does, that's the place to get it. I will talk briefly about things that I do throughout the course of this course, but really, if you want to hear about my journey in particular, please check out that video. So at the beginning of my journey, it was all about the limbic system. And then as I started hearing about different experts from different subject matters, and every time I would switch and I would go into what I thought was a new area, those experts brought me back to the nervous system. And so what I started realizing is that once I learned about the nervous system, it dawned on me, one, I better understand my personal symptoms and signs. And I was able to then go deeper in my self-regulation practice by understanding more about the nervous system. And what really struck me about the nervous system is how when you understand it and when you understand what's going on, you really start understanding what's going on at a much deeper level. And you realize that literally every single road leads us back to the nervous system. And the nervous system underpins our ability to self-regulate. Without understanding this, it is very hard, in my opinion, to work towards increasing our ability to self-regulate and increasing our resilience. And so that is why this video is being created and is part of this course. I also want to mention the fact that I am going to do my very best to keep this information accurate while at the same time simple and general, higher level. I don't want to take us into a deep dive of the autonomic nervous system. I don't want to describe the complexities of it. If you want more science, I encourage you to check out a playlist I created on my YouTube channel that goes deeper into the autonomic nervous system. For the purposes of this course, I want to keep it as general and higher order as possible. The other thing I want to share with you is that our autonomic nervous system helps with a fundamental goal for why we are on this planet. So we are on this planet to evolve and to survive. And in order to do that, we need our autonomic nervous system because it keeps us safe. You're going to hear me say this repeatedly throughout the course. Safety is important. Our autonomic nervous system and our brains also help us conserve energy. And that is why I talk about energy and the balance of these two. So you see the words sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and the balance of these two arms of the autonomic nervous system. For me, self-regulation at the core is here. And so I want to share that with you today, because simply talking about the limbic system does not allow us to have a full, complete picture of what's happening, and I believe limits us in really going deeper in our self-regulation practice. So with that, we are going to start with our brain. So I mentioned before that we are here to evolve and survive. And in order to do that, we need safety. We are not here, like I'm here, I'm a relational therapist on this earth, I'm raising my children and so on. Yes, with our evolution, we have found so many different jobs for ourselves. And for many of us, I can only speak for myself right now, I have found my passion, which is self-regulation, and I am dedicating my life to constantly learning about it. I really want to dive deep in this. And so for me, yes, I'm dedicating my life to this, but ultimately I am really here on this planet to evolve and to stay safe so that I can survive. And the key component to doing that is our brains. And in our brains, I'm not going to talk about what each individual structure of the brain does, because for the purposes of this course, I don't think it's necessary. Again, for your curiosity, check out the YouTube channel. For right now, I want to go back to our analogy of the phone and talk about how our brains are like the central processing unit underpinning everything. Without our brains, we can't function in our bodies. Everything starts here, including what we think our sensations are in our bodies is really happening in our brain. And so I'll give an example. If you have brain damage of a certain area, or some people I believe are born with this, there's a part of our brain that detects pain. And so if that part is damaged or we're born without it, then we are not able to detect pain in our bodies, which lends evidence to the fact that everything happens in our brain. Even though we may feel full, or I might sense my fingers rubbing against each other like this right now, it's really the signals in my brain that is giving those sensations. So this is a very important point, because our brains control everything, and that is major point number one. Point number two, our brains are pattern detecting machines. And through the neurons in our brains, the neurons come together in network to create these patterns so that we can predict what's going to happen in our environments in order for two things: to conserve our energy and to keep ourselves safe. So our brains are pattern detecting machines. The neurons create networks in the brain in order to do that. There is one structure I want to talk about. It is called the limbic system. And that limbic system, so when you look at the brain, we've got the gray part that we see underneath, in the center of our heads, is the limbic system. I'm not going to talk about all the different structures of the limbic system. I want to just give the analogy of the limbic system being our body's alarm system, okay? So if you live in a house with an alarm system, if you live in a building with an alarm system, if you work in an office with an alarm system, or even in an office with fire detectors, okay? It's constantly on. So our brains are constantly on. Our limbic systems are constantly scanning the environment and paying attention to the environment and taking in the signals that are being received in order to send the alarm when it detects something that's going on in the environment that we need to pay attention to keep ourselves safe. And so the limbic system is then going to send, and all of this is happening right at crazy fast speeds. We don't even detect how fast it's happening, okay? For us, it's instantaneous. And so our limbic system is then going to send out a signal and send it out through our body. Now, that is, for right now, enough information about the brain. Key points: pattern detecting machine in order to determine and keep ourselves safe, to find things in the environment that might harm us. This pattern detecting is also a way to conserve energy by saving time. Could you imagine if we didn't have that ability to detect patterns and we were constantly learning things for the first time every single time? We would expend so much energy. So from the moment we're born, our brains and the neurons are creating these patterns. So energy conservation and pattern detection to keep ourselves safe. Now, our brains are connected to the rest of our bodies. In the previous video, I talked about how we need to think about our brains and our bodies together connected, and we can't separate the two. So physically, our brains are connected to the rest of our bodies through a nerve called the vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve, think of it as an information superhighway because it takes information or signals from the brain and sends it to the body. And it takes signals from the outside world and our organs and everything and sends those signals back up to the brain. So it's communicating in two directions. And from that, we are now going to stop here and we're going to start talking about the sympathetic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is divided in two branches. You have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. We're going to first talk about the sympathetic. Now, one of the key things, because I've mentioned energy before, one of the key points that I want to make right now is the fact that when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, that's how I'm going to refer to it, we are burning energy. And we have to think of this activation as a dimmer. It is not an on-off switch. It's not like what turning your phone on and turning your phone off. And I can tell you that I remember when I was in high school learning about this and learning about fight, flight response, which is another way to describe the sympathetic nervous system. I thought of it as an on and off switch, that if I was faced with a predatory animal or I was faced with a car careening towards me where my life was really in danger, that's when the sympathetic nervous system was going to kick on. When in reality, what I have learned and what totally changed my understanding and changed a lot for me with my self-regulation practice is that you need to think of the sympathetic nervous system activation as a dimmer. So going back to the phone analogy, we can adjust the brightness of the light on our phone. So autonomically, we're not physically adjusting, and I'm going to say that right now, it's autonomic. It's happening on its own, but it's not an on-off where it's fully on and fully off. Because we need this throughout the day to actually get things done. That's the other thing I realized, is that our sympathetic nervous system is being activated throughout the day on regular, everyday. Like right now, it's activated as I'm speaking into this camera and speaking to you and trying to explain all of this to you. It's activated. I'm not in any real life danger, so it's not on fully activation mode, but it is activated. My heart is beating faster. My breathing is shallower and faster. And I can feel some tightening in my abdominal area, and I feel tension in my body as I'm speaking to all of you. So what happens is this gets activated throughout the day. So what is happening when the sympathetic nervous system is activated? Well, like I just mentioned, our heart beats faster, our breathing is also faster and shallower, and our digestive system slows down and, depending on how activated, might even shut down, which explains why some of us, when it's activated, we feel nauseous or we feel like we have to run to the bathroom to release our bladder and our bowels, because our digestive system is in the process of slowing down, shutting down, and by that, it's impacting our digestive system. Now, these are just three of the things. What else happens? We can feel sweaty. We can feel shaky and trembling. All of these things are there, one, to help us to safety. Remember, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, which I will discuss in another video. And we are burning energy. So depending on how much activation, we will burn more energy as the brightness of our phones is higher increases in intensity. Our phones drain their batteries faster. The same thing, the more this is on, the more we are going to burn energy. And so another way that I learned to think about this that helps me understand it is the more it's activated, the more alert and aware I am. And focus. So that will explain for now the sympathetic nervous system. If you want to know more, I encourage you to go to the playlist or to go and learn about it deeper at the library, on the internet. Just make sure your sources are accurate. So that is the sympathetic nervous system. The other side is the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, for the parasympathetic nervous system, I want you to think of a parachute, because originally when I learned about this, I was getting very confused. And I was thinking, well, the sympathetic nervous system is having sympathy for me. And so therefore, I was thinking of it as the rest and digest. When in fact, I like to think about it as my sympathetic nervous system is having sympathy for me. So it's going to take me to safety by either fighting, fleeing, freezing, or fawning. And then I heard someone, I wish I remember who it was, who talked about it this way: to remember the parasympathetic system and it being all about safety, para and parachute. Parachute will bring us to safety. So think about that, and that's another way of remembering that the parasympathetic system is synonymous with safety. And I recently heard safe and social, and I love that. And it is also considered rest and digest. So what does this mean? This means that our breathing is going to slow down. Our heart rate is going to slow down. Our digestion is going to come back online, and we're going to burn much, much less energy. If anything, this is a great place to actually charge our internal batteries. So I want us to think about the parasympathetic system as a lovely place to be, and also know that if we haven't been in this place for a long time, it's going to feel, one, foreign and uncomfortable. And so I experienced that many times throughout my life, where I was so used to being in sympathetic nervous system activation that when I was finally in parasympathetic nervous system activation mode, which is how I like to think about it, I didn't enjoy it. I actually actively tried to avoid it. And it was only when I had my first burnout that I learned to enjoy it, and now I crave it. So it is normal that at the beginning, this doesn't feel so wonderful to many of you. The other thing that I want to say here is that the parasympathetic nervous system, and actually the autonomic nervous system, we think of it in terms of it's automatic. And I want to take that away, that idea away, because it's not as automatic as you may seem. We can actually control the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. We can actually bring on the parasympathetic nervous system through our breath. And we can also, through certain breathing techniques, bring on the sympathetic nervous system. But the point that I really want to make is breath work and our lungs are very important in this whole dynamic. And I also want to impart that when we think that it's all autonomic and it's all automatic, then we might believe that when we're not in sympathetic nervous system activation, that we're automatically in parasympathetic nervous system activation. And that is another thing that really impacted me when I figured that out, that I have to bring this on. I have to do activities to bring this on so that, and we're about to hit it, so that we're able to finish the stress response cycle. So what does that mean? I'm now going to move us into how this all comes together. This is how I like to see it, and I've also seen it like this, it described like this in other places. And I thought it was amazing, so I wanted to bring it here. Now, when we learned about the autonomic nervous system, we learned about threats. It's all about the threats that trigger the sympathetic nervous system. And when I hear the word threat, I hear something negative, something to be avoided. I wanted to change that word, and I wanted to use a word that is common in society right now, and that, yes, has a bit of a negative connotation in society and can also be more neutral. So the word I'm using is trigger, because what is triggering the cycle? What is triggering our sympathetic nervous system? So there are a lot of triggers, and many of the videos to come are going to identify them, many that you would not believe are actually triggers. And so a lot of what you're going to hear going forward in this course is going to really change the way you think and see the world. And so you might actually want to resist it, because for the beginning, it was really even hard for me to completely change the way I believed about things and the way I'd been taught things. And so I know that it's going to be challenging. It's okay. I am here with you every step of the way. So we have a trigger, and hopefully you could see my cursor because I've got my mouse on the word, or beneath the word trigger. So we start with a trigger, step 1. That trigger triggers the limbic system, step 2. The limbic system then sends a signal to trigger the sympathetic nervous system. Again, the trigger is not a threat. So it's more, something can be neutral. It can be a threat, and it can be something that is pretty neutral that we are very used to in our daily lives. So we're now step 3, the sympathetic nervous system has been activated. Then we go, when that trigger is gone, we go into parasympathetic nervous system activation. Now, this is how the stress response cycle is supposed to work. These 4, and at least steps 1 to 3 happen almost instantaneously without our knowing, and it just happens, okay? 2, keep us safe, conserve energy. I also want to talk about how, when I see this is how I see resilience being built. We hear so much about resilience in our society right now. I'm in Canada. I would say we hear about a lot in North American society. I have no idea about Europe and other parts of the world, but we hear about resilience building a lot. And this is how I see it getting done. So if we were to start lifting weights, we wouldn't go and grab 250 pounds and start lifting that weight right off the bat. We would start small and build ourselves up to being able to lift 250 pounds. So the same thing, if we want to build resilience, we need to expose ourselves to increasing triggers of increasing intensity or increasing strengths or increasing size, okay? And by doing that, and then bringing on the parasympathetic nervous system, we're able to close that cycle, and that's how we're able to build resilience. So this is very important, because I believe that today, with all of our modern technological advances, we are actually going backwards. These modern technological advances are making life so easy now for many of us that our resilience is getting weaker instead of stronger. So all of these wonderful technological advances that have amazing benefits that are really helping so many things, are also having another consequence. And the other consequence is that I believe our resilience muscle is getting weaker. So I also believe something else at the same time. I also believe that we are being faced with constant triggers throughout the day. And again, I'm going to talk about those triggers a little later on in the course. We are being constantly bombarded by triggers, which are triggering our limbic system, our sympathetic nervous system, and we're not bringing on our parasympathetic system because of what's happening in our culture and our society right now, and because of what's happening with technology and what's available to us. I think that what we are using, the tools, the techniques, the devices that we think are bringing on our parasympathetic nervous system, are actually triggers. And so we are skipping this part where you see the question mark, and we are now in a 3-step stress response cycle. And because when we are in sympathetic nervous system activation, we are burning energy, I believe that we are constantly burning energy, and we are not charging our energy properly or at all. And for many of us, we are leading to burnout. And for others, we are just always feeling very, very depleted in energy and not having enough. And so this is the way I have been able to make sense of my burnout and make sense of everything that has happened to me. And it's the way that I started thinking about things in order to start taking action and helping myself. So that's all I'm going to say about the nervous system for right now. I have one other thing I want to say in general about how we are wired, how our brains are wired. And then we're going to stop this video and stop talking about our nervous system and start talking about the 2-step process. So let me go into this last piece that I want to talk about, the way our brains are wired. We are not wired to work on our own. So just like if I were to take your phone or my phone, and I were to put my phone on a desk or just put it down somewhere, unless I spoke to the AI, so in my case, I have an iPhone, so unless I spoke to Siri or I physically picked up the phone and typed something into it, the phone isn't going to work on its own. It needs me to either set it to do something, but it needs my interaction. The same thing with us. We are wired for connection. And to really share with you how important connection is in our lives, we have neurons dedicated for 4 things that are critical for our survival: hydration, sleep, food, and connection. So connection is so important for our survival that it's up there with hydration, food, and sleep. When I talk about self-regulation, I talk about our abilities to self-regulate. Connection and co-regulation is a critical component to this puzzle. And without connection to another human being or other human beings, plural, could be one, could be several, depending on who you are and what your preferences are. From the moment we're born until the moment we die, we need this connection. And again, it doesn't need to be from a significant other. It can be from caregivers. It can be from friends. It can be from family members. It can be from many different sources. As long as we are connected to other human beings, real connection, deep connection, that we feel connected to that person and not simply feel like it's a superficial connection, but that it's a deep connection where we feel we can be ourselves with that person can understand us, and we feel better with that person. So we've talked about the brain and how it's a pattern detecting machine. We talked about how this pattern detecting is critical for our survival and for our energy conservation. We talked about the different parts of the autonomic nervous system and how all of those parts come together. And now we're talking about how connection is a critical component to all of those things. So with that, we're going to end this video. I invite you to join me into the next. And again, if you want to go deeper here, I invite you to check out the playlist on my channel. And please use the comment section to put in questions, comments. If you're an expert in this area, please share with us additional information that you feel would be needed. This is a forum where we can help each other and we can really take this to another level.